Hi, everybody. Can you hear me all right? My name is Kyle. I am the digital media manager for Rocky Mountain PBS, and if you all wouldn't mind introducing yourselves and talking a little bit about your relationship with the ski train before we get started, I would appreciate that.
My name is Sean Flannery. I've been working on the ski train since I was a little boy. I worked mostly with the Anschutz Corporation when they had the operation, and that's how I'm involved.
This fellow showed me how to ride the ski train. I think he's born on the thing. He's ridden more than anybody. But I'm Steve Patterson, and I live beside the DNRG track 44 years. And I'd see a ski train go by on weekends. And I'd come out here to the Railroad Museum. When did it start? Nobody knew. They had no idea how long I had to make it right. I said, well, I guess I got some work to do. So I went to Denver Public Library and started scrolling through microfilm. I scrolled up a year, and there it was. February 9, 1936 is when it started.
So Steve literally wrote the book on the ski train. I'm Paul Hammond. I'm the museum executive director here at the Colorado Railroad Museum. These two gentlemen know far more about the ski train. My passion is railroading in the West and specifically here in Colorado. So I get much more excited about 6-mile-long tunnels and how they've transformed the state. And so I think on the video, we all had a chance to chime in with what were our passions.
Well, Paul, I found it interesting. You kind of touched on it a little bit in the documentary, but I feel like the Eisenhower Tunnel gets a lot of credit, but the Moffett Tunnel is like so much cooler.
Well, and it really is. I grew up in California, and if you really want to talk about tunnel building, go back to the Transcontinental Railroad when you had to do it a couple inches a day. That took even longer. By the time the Moffett Tunnel was being built, we at least had semi-modern ways of getting the thing built. You know, these days, though, that's what we've gotten so used to is we have these tunnel boring machines that just chew right through everything and spit out a tube behind you, and it wasn't that way. So the Eisenhower Tunnel was somewhere in between those. It wasn't quite the boring machine either, but it was a heck of a lot easier project because technology had gotten so better by that time.
Mm-hmm. And Steve, I'm curious to talk about I feel like we owe a debt to the Norwegians for introducing us to these winter sports. Was that something you were surprised to learn during your research for the book?
Yes, it was. I came across those two fellows that went up to rode one of Moffat's trains the same year he died. He died in March, and they came in December and rode one of his trains up to the top. And they looked around, and it was, getting late in the afternoon, and it's almost Christmas time, week, and the days are short. We don't have much light. Which way are we going to go, east or west? So they went west, I guess, to make advantage of the more light. And they wound up 44 miles later in Hot Sulphur Springs where this carnival was going on.
Yeah. And Sean, just to confirm, you were not born on the ski train, right?
No, not quite, yeah. Close.
Yeah. Well, what do you remember about your first trip?
Well, the first trip was with the Eskimo Ski Club. My neighbors had said, I think it's a good idea if all of our friends in the neighborhood learned how to ski. And so we hopped on a shuttle bus down to Union Station, and I just remember like a rope drop at Disneyland that all of a sudden everyone's just running to the train, and I remember getting separated from my friends and getting on a different seat, and they come finding me, and then they all took back with all the friends, and we met another gentleman a friend of ours that was selling candy on the train, and that's how we got started, selling candy and different things, and I came up with a different plan, like how can we make it bigger and what sort of inventory can we have and how to make it bigger and better. So that's one of my first memories of that. And just the other thing I remember is the smell. We had oranges on the train a lot, and you would bowl in the middle of the aisle. You take these little Dixie cups that Rio Grande would have to give water, and you would just put them in the aisle, and then you'd bowl down the aisle. We had quite a lot of fun on the train with the Eskimos, and after a while, it became the kids' train in a sense. I mean, we had 3 out of 7 coaches or something, so definitely it became a lot of fun that way. And we would also, we would sneak into the electrical box and turn off the lights as we go into the Moffat Tunnel so you could steal a kiss. And then we get in trouble and the lights would go back on and then you'd go back bowling, just different stuff like that. And I would go back to selling candy with my friends. We would actually go through the train selling, just like they do at the stadiums now. But we had, we're like 10 years old with changers and money bags and suitcases and that sort of thing. So it was a good time. Taught me a lot for sure.
Yeah. How long did you do that?
Well, I think I did it until Anschutz bought it. I was, I think, 8 or 10 when I started, and then was approached to do a proposal by a gentleman that worked for the Anschutz Corporation. And I was 15 years old, and he said, you should think about doing catering on the ski train. I'm like, okay. So I'm 15 years old, I'm going through Denver, and I'm meeting with vendors and looking at licenses and construction and that. And then we didn't get the contract because I was too young to get a liquor license. So they wouldn't give me the contract, us the contract, but they were impressed that I was a go-getter, so they said, well, how would you like to work for us? I was like, sounds like a good deal.
How many times in your career and as a kid, how many trips do you think you've clocked on the train?
Definitely hundreds and hundreds. At one point in time when I think you wrote the book or did the added book, they figured I'd probably spend a month of my life in the Moffat Tunnel, just from the different amount of times I've done back. And I worked for the Anschutz Corporation and did their thing until it ended. And then when the Anschutz left or sold, there's no train for a while. But then when Amtrak came back and wanted to run it, they said, hey, you should get this Flannery guy. Maybe he can help you to manage your volunteer program. So I said, okay. I can't imagine not being involved with the ski train because it's such a big part of my life, and it's a big part of Denver. And so you'll do anything you can for different things that mean a lot to you, and that's one thing that you'll do anything for.
I'm curious for you, Steve, when did you write the book, and what was the train in operation when you published?
Yeah, the book came out the press. I'll never forget it. 4 days before Christmas, 1984. But it came out 1984, been revised twice after that. But Frank Buckley is one that started the Eskimo Ski Club. Had a great deal to do with the ski train lasting as long as it did. And he started a ski club, and that itself, the Eskimo Ski Club has lots of stories. It's in the book. Rick Ball Cadillac, they met on the ski train. Jerry Gart Brothers Sporting Goods, he and his wife met on a ski train as Eskimos.
Well, and thinking back to, I know you said you updated the book a couple times, but from 1984 to now, what are some of the biggest changes that you've seen with the ski train?
Oh my goodness, it went from daylight to dark. From dark to sunlight when Anschutz took it over. The old ski train only had, like I say, 600 and some seats, and the only way you could buy a ticket, you had to go down to Union Station in person at 8 o'clock on Monday morning when they started selling tickets for the next Saturday and Sunday. You had to be there in person to buy a ticket. There's no reservation system, no telephone, no nothing. And then when Anschutz took it over, now we got computers. You can make a reservation from home. You can go up on one weekend, come back the following weekend or some other. All these different things. You couldn't do that on the old ski train. And they had such wonderful things in the morning, like coffee and croissants and muffins and all that. And coming back, I had nachos and beer and wine. They never had that on the old ski train.
Mm-hmm. And Paul, have you been able to ride the ski train?
Absolutely. In fact, I think I showed up in the pictures there because I was on that last celebration with conductor Brad.
Oh,
which
yes,
was quite the party.
Yes. It was kind of sad to hear Gary talk about it leaving that last time before it, kind of resurrected. But when you look at it, it's 2.5 years from when Brad called Gary to them getting it back up and running. I think of big infrastructure and transportation projects as moving at this glacial pace, but that's really not that long. It really came together pretty quickly. I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
Well, the only things that they really had to do Amtrak had to figure out, where were they going to get an extra locomotive and 5 or 6 cars. And if you look at their traffic patterns, right after Christmas, there's plenty of availability. In fact, right after Thanksgiving, which I think is still their busiest time. And so, that was kind of a no-brainer. And there's already a train station downtown. There's already tracks. Somebody else built the tunnel. They really had to then put in that platform. And so that became the major part of the infrastructure. And in the world of construction projects, there are far more complicated things they could have chosen.
Right. Yeah. And in the kind of train enthusiast community, what has the overall mood been since it's been brought back?
I think there's a mystique to the ski train. The idea of trains that went up to take you to snow is not new, and it didn't start here. The tradition really started in New England. And, well, they call them mountains, but they're not terribly high. So the ride is a whole different idea. This, you go up 4,000 feet, and then you go through America's longest railroad tunnel. Or actually, it's highest, not longest. There are a couple of longer ones. And it just has a spectacular quality that there's nothing like it.
Sean, I'm wondering if you can speak about this too, but one of the young woman who worked on the train, and she was kind of talking about the ephemeral feeling of the ski train. It's here for a short period of time every year, and then it goes away for a little bit. What is it like when the season picks up again, as someone who's ridden the train many times?
Well, it's definitely a busy time of the season because you ramp up and you hit it running in a sense. And a lot of times, at least in the most recent history, you get word from Amtrak of what's going to happen, and because we don't know right away, and so sometimes you have to be kind of ready with your mitt on to catch the ball to get it to run. So it's an energetic time. It's an exciting time to see what's going to happen for the year. And it's also fun, at least with the Anschutz train. Also, it was also how can we make this year better? What new things can we do one step higher, customer service-wise? New things. And Amtrak kind of follows the same plan. It's like, well, we're going to add a car. We're going to, bring a lounge on. We're going to go on special trips and that sort of thing. So I think year to year, how do we make this better as an experience for the passenger is kind of what we do.
If you had a magic wand, what is something that you would want to see improved for the future of the ski train?
Well, one thing that Amtrak is starting to do is doing group sales. With the Anschutz Corporation, we would seek out groups in Denver, whether it was law firms. We had the United Mainliners, which is a group with United Airlines that would come. They would fly in from all across the United States to ride this train. And so that's how we got a lot of momentum throughout the United States, people coming in and riding the ski train. So I think Amtrak is seeing that there's a lot of potential for this to occur. And so they're getting more and more groups. So I think that's kind of where it's headed. And I think that as that expands, they'll see just how big this can be. When the ski train did it, they would, all of a sudden, the ski train became ski train in the summer. So it expanded to have, biking at Winter Park. We did a few excursions to Glenwood Springs. They didn't go great because it's a longer way to Glenwood, and you have to figure out how do you drop 700 people off and get them hotels. And you kind of figure out, well, maybe this is too big for us, So we found that the Winter Park is almost perfect for anything. The Anschutz train also had a lot of presentations on the train where you would have your captive audience and you would do your spiel or whatever you wanted to present, and then you get off and go ski. So I think, again, as Amtrak sees this, that's a market that they can tap into.
Yeah. Well, and obviously he mentions in the documentary, but Brad is retiring, but Brad was in many ways the on-train entertainment through that process. Me having ridden it a couple times, it was a kind of standout. Steve, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, getting to know Brad and kind of his advocacy and relationship with the train.
Yeah, I ran into Brad, of course, on the Amtrak. I was a a docent for National Park Service. They had a service on summer weekends only, Denver to Grand Junction, and come back the next day. And I served on that for about 7 or 8 summers, and that's where I first met Brad. And Brad he'd make announcements on the PA about this or that or whatever, you know. And you just knew right, this guy is 100% true carrot. And I got to tell one of his stories, because he loved to tell his story on the PA. And a man has not succeeded in life. He hasn't reached his full potential, what he can do in life. He hasn't reached his top of what he can do until he becomes a master fly fisherman. Brad said that.
Yeah.
And Brad actually, he was an intern. He approached the vice president of the Ansys Corporation to actually become his own intern for us. And so he was a go-getter from the get-go. So he had a vision of what he wanted. You knew he'd be involved in trains from the time that you'd see him. And then he would work for us, and he worked in the marketing department, and you could just see his mind moving. Again, how do we do this? And then he wanted to. He worked at, or he went to school, I think, at Metro State, and did schooling there. And then you knew he'd worked for Amtrak, and it's been neat to see him throughout the stages of what he's done. Now it's hard to believe he's retiring, and that's just I think it's just a word, you know, for Brad. You know, I'm retired, but he's going to be active in a whole bunch of different things, and so I'm sure his story's not over.
Well, that was kind of it for my questions. Is there anything the three of you would like to add, or if anyone has a question from the audience, I'd be happy to take it.
Evening, I'm Tom Vesey. This is directed at Sean. For a couple of years, I worked in the Burnham coat shops, and in the winter on Monday mornings, we had to clean up all the orange peels and trash and everything. And we said if we ever met one of those Eskimo Ski Club members,
I just watched.
I grew up in Boulder, so I never rode the ski train out of Denver, but we got on at a glamorous spot called Rocky, which hasn't been talked about yet tonight. But had a very rugged boarding platform, as I recall.
Yeah, I think that there's been some talk about, it's nothing official, but there's been some discussions on how do we bring in the Front Range Boulder to ride the new Winter Park Express, because that was something that was popular, a stop. Because a lot of people feel like, well, if I'm coming from Boulder, I don't want to go to Denver in order to get to Winter Park. So I think that's been some discussion on how do we make that work in the large picture for Amtrak. And also, Colorail that's an advocacy group here in Denver that's looking at options on how do we expand the ski train service and what does that look like. So I think that's something that's definitely been considered, but I don't know where it's at.
The ski train wasn't just a ski train. It was a train that got you into the mountains and got you to the Fraser River Valley. And as Paul alluded to, for a lot of us, it wasn't skiing at Winter Park. We would go to the old tubing hill in Fraser, or we'd figure out how to get to Snow Mountain Ranch or Devil's Thumb for snowshoeing and then make it back in time so we could still catch the train.
My understanding also from a conductor that I worked with on the Rio Grande ski train, but they also did fishing specials out of Denver that it never made it to the Moffat Tunnel or anything, but there's different lakes and things along the way that they would stop the train and people go off and fish. So it's kind of like the light rail of that era, you know, into the mountains. Yeah.
Right. Thank you all so much. Have a lovely night.